My father, Harlan Harrow, publicly called me a failure at the one event that mattered most to him in the world. Karma, in the form of a former student I barely remembered, was about to destroy his entire worldview in front of his heroes, and I never had to say a single word. There's a specific kind of humiliation that only a parent can inflict. It's not a loud, angry outburst. It's a quiet, condescending dismissal delivered with a polite smile in a room full of people whose opinions they value more than yours. For years, I had weathered these little paper cuts to the soul. But on this night, surrounded by crystal and crushing expectations, he handed me a wound that I thought would never heal. He had no idea he was actually digging his own grave. If you believe in karma, you're going to want to stay for this. Go ahead and hit that like button if you think that sometimes the universe has a funny way of keeping score. My name is Denise Stevens. For 7 years, I was a literature lecturer at Northwood City College. It wasn't Harvard, but it was real. I taught kids who worked 2 jobs, single mothers, and veterans trying to find their footing. I didn't just teach Shakespeare. I taught them how to articulate their own stories, how to think critically about the world bombarding them. I loved it. But after a round of brutal budget cuts, my contract wasn't renewed. For the past year, I'd been making ends meet by tutoring online. In the eyes of the world, and especially in the eyes of my father, I had failed. My father, Harlan Harrow, is a man built out of prestige. A retired corporate lawyer, his entire identity is tethered to his alma mater, West Haven University. To him, West Haven isn't just a school. It's a holy institution, a benchmark against which all other achievements are measured. My city college job was, in his words, a charitable detour. My current tutoring work, a source of deep, unspoken shame. Which is why I had no idea why he insisted I attend the West Haven annual Benefactors Gala. It was the social event of the season for his set, a $1,000 a plate dinner in a hall that looked like a cathedral, filled with deans, donors, and the city's elite. I felt like a fraud in my rented dress. "Just try to look pleased to be here, Denise," he'd murmured as we entered, his hand a heavy, proprietary weight on my back. "Dean Albright is at our table. This is important." The table was a microcosm of my father's world. Dean Albright, a woman with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a tech CEO who had donated the new science wing, and their impeccably polished spouses. My father was in his element, holding court, laughing his booming laugh. I, the dowdy, unemployed daughter, was the unfortunate centerpiece he had to explain. "And this is my daughter, Denise. She dabbled in academia for a time," he announced to the table, a magnanimous host showing off a slightly disappointing piece of art. The word hung in the air, dripping with condescension. Dabbled. 7 years of 60-hour work weeks, of grading papers until 2 a.m., of pouring my heart into lesson plans, reduced to a frivolous hobby? Dean Albright gave me a polite, pitying look. "Oh, how interesting. At West Haven?" My father jumped in before I could even open my mouth. "Good heavens, no," he chuckled, as if the idea was absurd. "A city college. Very noble work, of course. She's tutoring now. Online." He said the word online like it was a contagious disease. The tech CEO's wife leaned forward. "Well, that must be very rewarding. Helping young people." My father beamed, seizing the opportunity to reframe my failure as his own magnanimity. "It is. I always tell her, not every path is paved with glory. Some are paths of simple surface. It's a respectable, if not exactly ambitious, way to spend one's time." A hot flush crawled up my neck. I focused on the intricate pattern of the tablecloth, the cold condensation on my water glass, anything to avoid the sympathetic glances. He was patting me on the head in front of these titans of industry, painting me as his simple-minded, charitable project.
and I just sat there and took it. Arguing was pointless. It would only create a scene, proving his point that I lacked the grace and decorum for a place like this. My role was to smile, nod, and silently affirm the narrative that I was the family's resident disappointment. I excused myself to the restroom just to breathe air that wasn't thick with my own humiliation. When I returned, the lights were dimming. The gala's main event was about to begin, the presentation of the Alumnus of the Year award. My father was practically vibrating with excitement. "Ah, here we go," he whispered loudly to the table. Leonard Thompson, the man's a genius, took his father's software company and made it a global powerhouse. Barely 35. This is the kind of success West Haven produces. He looked pointedly at me. The message was clear. This is what you should have been. The university president gave a glowing introduction, listing Leonard Thompson's incredible achievements. He'd revolutionized data security, and his philanthropic work was extensive. He sounded like a superhero. A handsome, well-dressed man took the stage to a thunderous standing ovation. My father was clapping so hard his hands were red.
Leonard Thompson stepped to the podium, looking out at the sea of adoring faces. He was poised, confident, everything my father admired. He began with the usual pleasantries, thanking the board, his family. I was just counting the seconds until I could leave. Then he paused. His gaze swept the room, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes locked with mine. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "I'm deeply honored by this award," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "But the truth is, I almost didn't graduate from this university. I wouldn't be standing on this stage tonight if it weren't for a lecturer from a small city college on the other side of town who refused to let me fail. Her name is Denise Stevens." The sound in the grand hall didn't just quiet, it vanished. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the air and noise out of the room, leaving only a ringing silence and the beat of my own heart in my ears. A spotlight, hot and white, swung through the darkness and landed directly on me. I froze, a fork halfway to my mouth, my face burning under the sudden, intense scrutiny of 1,000 pairs of eyes. I could feel my father, Harlan, next to me, not moving a muscle. He was a statue carved from pure shock. Leonard Thompson's voice, amplified and intimate, filled the void. "She's here tonight, I believe." This is where karma enters the story. Not with a bang, but with a name, spoken into a microphone. If you've ever wondered if the universe pays attention to the quiet, thankless work people do when no one is watching, you're about to get your answer. My mind was a frantic, chaotic mess. Leonard Thompson? The name was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place the face. I tutored dozens of students online, and before that taught hundreds at the college. They were a blur of names and essays. As my brain scrambled for a foothold, Leonard continued, and the first revelation landed on the room and on my father like a physical blow. What the university president didn't mention in his very generous introduction, he said, his tone shifting from celebratory to deeply serious, is that during my junior year here at West Haven, I was on academic probation. I was failing 3 of my 5 classes, not because I was lazy, but because I was drowning in a depression so deep I could barely get out of bed in the morning. A collective, hushed intake of breath swept the hall. In my father's world, mental health struggles weren't discussed. They were liabilities, weaknesses to be hidden. I risked a glance at him. His polite, patriarchal smile was gone, replaced by a tight, rigid mask. His knuckles were white where he gripped the stem of his wineglass. This was a narrative violation. The alumnus of the year, his paragon of success, was admitting to failure, to weakness. "I was ashamed," Leonard continued. "I was the son of Bernard Thompson. Failure wasn't an option, but my anxiety was so crippling I couldn't focus on a single page of text. The school's counseling services had a 6-week waiting list. I was about to drop out. And then a friend gave me the number for a tutor. This triggered the memory, and as he spoke, I was no longer in that glittering hall. While this was happening to them, while my father was basking in reflected glory, I was somewhere else entirely. The memory came back in sharp, unglamorous detail. I was in a fluorescent-lit cubicle at the City College Library, long after my last class had ended. It was a Tuesday, I think. I was exhausted, living off stale coffee and the vending machine sandwich I'd had for dinner. Across from me sat a young man who couldn't meet my eyes. He was pale, with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. Leonard. He was just a kid then, swallowed by a too big West Haven hoodie. I don't get it, he had mumbled, pushing a copy of Ulysses across the table like it was toxic. It's just words. They don't mean anything. I didn't talk about symbolism or stream of consciousness. I saw the panic in his eyes. So I just said, okay, let's forget Joyce. Tell me about something you love, something you do get. He talked for 20 minutes about coding, the logic, the elegance, the way you could build a whole world from scratch. His entire posture changed. He sat up straighter. His eyes lit up. There, I said gently. That's it. That's your way in. Joyce is just coding with feelings. Let's find the first line of his code. Back in the gala hall, Leonard's voice pulled me from the memory. This was the second revelation. He was describing that exact moment to 1,000 of the city's most powerful people. Denise didn't just re-explain the material, he said, and his voice was thick with emotion now. She saw that I was broken, and she treated me with dignity, not pity. She stayed late. She didn't charge me for the first 2 sessions because she knew I was broke. She translated dense literary theory into metaphors about computer programming because she took the time to learn how I thought. She didn't just teach me the subject, she taught me how to learn again. She gave me the confidence to walk into the counseling center and say, I need help. She saved my degree, and I can honestly say, she saved my life. I stared down at my plate, my cheeks on fire. This was too much. This was a private, small moment between a teacher and a student. It wasn't meant for this audience, for this opulent room. What I learned later was, my father's words from an hour ago echoed in my head. Dabbled in academia, simple service, respectable if not exactly ambitious. He had no idea. He had no clue that this simple service, performed in a drab library cubicle far from his world of prestige, had just been credited with saving the man he idolized. The room erupted in applause. It was different this time. It wasn't polite, it was thunderous, emotional. People were turning in their seats, their faces full of awe, trying to get a better look at me. I felt my father shrink beside me. He had become invisible. Then came the third and most brutal revelation. Leonard held up a hand, but I'm not the only one here tonight who wants to thank her. He turned to the front row. Dad? An older man, impeccably dressed, but with kind, sharp eyes, stood up. This had to be Leonard Thompson, the Titan, the man whose company was a household name. He walked calmly onto the stage and took the second microphone. My father looked like he'd seen a ghost. Leonard Thompson wasn't just a donor. He was the donor, the kingmaker. My name is Leonard Thompson, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying immense authority. And everything my son said is true. I was a busy man back then, too busy. I saw my son's grades, and I saw weakness. I threatened, I cajoled. I almost lost him.
I had no idea that a literature lecturer from City College was doing the real work of a parent, the work I had failed to do.
He looked directly at me, and his gaze was intense. I later found out that Miss Stevens often used her own meager salary to buy books for students who couldn't afford them, that she never charged for extra time, that she did all this without ever expecting a thing in return. My son tried to pay her back years later, and she politely refused. This was true. An email had arrived a few years ago with a generous offer. I just assumed it was spam and deleted it. Bernard continued. Well, Miss Stevens, I'm not taking no for an answer this time. The Thompson Family Foundation considers your work not as tutoring, but as a critical, life-saving intervention. We view it as a professional service that was never properly compensated. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. So tonight, we are awarding you a personal grant of $200,000 effective immediately. A loud collective gasp, a flurry of whispers. $200,000. It was a number so large it didn't feel real. It was more money than I'd made in the last 5 years combined. I felt dizzy, lightheaded. My father made a small, choked sound beside me. His face was ashen. His entire value system, the one that equated financial success with moral worth, had just been turned completely upside down. The daughter he just pitied for her lack of ambition was being handed a fortune for the very work he deemed worthless. But Bernard Thompson wasn't finished. He was just warming up. And what he said next was the final, life-altering, karmic blow, the fourth revelation. But that's just a down payment, Bernard said, a smile finally touching his lips. We don't just want to reward past work. We want to empower future work. My son's story is not unique. There are thousands of young people suffering in silence on the brink of failure, not because they lack intellect, but because they lack support. So the foundation is announcing its largest ever educational endowment. He took a deep breath. This evening, we are officially pledging $9 million to found a new, independent institution dedicated to providing integrated academic and mental wellness support for college students across the city. It will provide free tutoring, counseling, and mentorship. The hall was dead silent, hanging on his every word. We believe the leadership of this institute requires a unique blend of academic rigor and profound human empathy. It requires someone who knows that a student's well-being is more important than a syllabus. He looked at me one last time, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Which is why it will be called the Denise Stevens Institute for Student Wellness. And we would be honored, Miss Stevens, if you would accept the position as its first president and CEO. The applause that followed was a physical force. It was a tidal wave of sound that washed over me, pinning me to my chair. Everyone was on their feet, not for Leonard or Bernard Thompson, but for me. The deans, the donors, Dean Albright, all of them, cheering for the woman my father had just dismissed as a failure. I just sat there, in the eye of the hurricane, realizing I'd never needed to defend myself. I'd never needed to fight back or prove my worth to him. I just had to do the work. I just had to be kind. Karma hadn't just settled a score. It had been working on a masterpiece while I was healing, and it had just been unveiled in front of the entire world. I sat there, pinned by the spotlight, the applause roaring in my ears, but I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel the sharp, satisfying sting of revenge I might have fantasized about on darker days. I felt free. It was a strange, hollowed-out feeling, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had just been lifted, leaving me dizzy and light. The need for my father's approval, a constant, dull ache that had shadowed my entire adult life, had just been publicly and spectacularly incinerated. Slowly, the applause subsided.
People started moving again. Bernard and Leonard Thompson were making their way toward our table, their faces beaming. Before they reached us, Dean Albright, the woman who had given me a pitying look not an hour before, leaned across the table, her own face a mask of awe. "Miss Stevens, Denise, that was extraordinary. We must talk." I could only manage a nod. My eyes, however, were on my father. He was staring at the tablecloth, his face a ghastly shade of pale. He looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as a titan or a judge, but as a small, confused old man. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at me, at the approaching Thompsons, at the people at neighboring tables now openly pointing and whispering with smiles. And the booming confidence that had defined his entire existence was just gone. He had built his world on a foundation of prestige, and a former student I barely remembered had just leveled it with a speech about kindness.
The car ride home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The silence in his luxury sedan was louder than the Gala's applause. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the road. I waited for him to say something, anything. An apology, an accusation, a question, but nothing came. He couldn't process it. His operating system had crashed. I, his failed daughter, had just been publicly validated, celebrated, and made wealthy and powerful by the very men he revered for the very qualities he had dismissed as worthless. The equation didn't compute. He had no framework for this reality. In that moment, I realized I didn't need him to say anything. His silence was the only confession he was capable of giving. That night was 6 months ago. My life today is unrecognizable. I am, as promised, the president and CEO of the Denise Stevens Institute for Student Wellness. We're headquartered in a beautifully restored historic building downtown, not a cold glass tower. My office has big windows and a comfortable sofa where students can actually sit and talk to me. My days are no longer about scraping by. They are about building something meaningful. I've hired brilliant, empathetic tutors and counselors, many from the same city college system I came from. We're creating programs, securing partnerships, and already helping hundreds of students from West Haven, Northwood, and beyond. The work is harder than anything I've ever done, but it is drenched in purpose. It's the same work I was doing before, just amplified, funded, and respected. And my father? He's quiet now. The booming pronouncements about success and ambition have ceased. He attended the Institute's groundbreaking ceremony. He stood at the back of the crowd, not in the VIP section I had reserved for him. He watched me give a speech, watched me shake hands with the mayor, watched me laugh with Leonard and Bernard. Later, he approached me, a tentative look on his face. "It's a very impressive building, Denise," he said, his voice soft. "Thank you, Dad," I replied, my voice neutral, not cold. He looked around at the vibrant young people, the hopeful energy. $9 million, he murmured, as if to himself. It's the only language he has left to understand my success. He can see the money and the title, but the why behind it all remains a foreign concept to him. He hasn't apologized, and I no longer expect him to. His punishment isn't ruin, it's irrelevance. The worldview he tried to force on me has been proven hollow, and he's been left behind in its wreckage. Our relationship isn't healed, but the power dynamic is forever broken. I am no longer the daughter seeking his approval. I am a woman who found her own way. In the end, I learned that karma isn't about payback. It's about balance. It's the quiet, inevitable force that ensures that what you put out into the world eventually finds its way back to you. I put out a little bit of kindness on a bleak Tuesday night with no expectation of reward. My father put out judgment and shame from his seat of power. The universe simply delivered both of our invoices.
If you believe in karma, share this video. Subscribe for more proof that the universe always keeps the receipts. Sometimes the best revenge is no revenge at all. It's just building a life so full of purpose that you forget you were ever supposed to be angry. My father, Harlan Harrow, publicly called me a failure. In the end, his idea of failure built a $9 million legacy of hope. I never had to do a thing.